Welcome to the Act Out Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Tomlin. Today's guest is the treasurer of the Virginia Young Democrats and the president of the Hampton Roads Young Democrats, Connor Eppley. Let's roll the tape. Public speaking is like one of the things I love.
Yeah.
I practiced like whenever I was a kid. I would watch the pastor at church like give a sermon, and I'll watch like how he talks, and then I would like go home and practice in the mirror.
Yep.
So I'm trying to, like, whenever I'm giving a speech, I tend to have a very like pastor cadence sometimes.
I definitely got those vibes. Like I'm a little more like, because the group I work with, we are at our faith group. So
Yeah.
I hear a lot of like pastors and faith leaders. I'm like, I'm going to ask him one time if he actually has like a link, because it feels very like not preachy, but like.
Oh no,
sermony,
I've been accused of being preachy before.
Yeah.
Is public speaking something that like comes naturally to you, or was it like you have to practice?
No, I don't. I still get stage fright doing it. Like
totally get that, yeah.
still definitely have the fear of public speaking, but I've gotten better at it as I've gone along. I did a class in high school that was really helpful. And we had to practice all different types of speeches and learning how to like format speeches, and then just practice makes perfect. But yeah, as I've gone along, it's still not my favorite thing to do. I like to be kind of behind the scenes, but it's necessary for being in politics, I guess. So I've grown accustomed to it.
For that speech at Waterside for the Young Dems, I had I'd gone around the canal in Norfolk.
Mhm.
I would walk around that canal listening to like 2000s like rap, and like just like I would be thinking of that speech like over and over again in my head, and I even to the point where I would think about messing up. Like I would imagine myself messing up at a particular part, and then like feel that in my body, like, oh my god, that panic, and then like let the panic go away, and then think about, okay, well, if I did mess up there, oh, I could just jump to this part. And so like it was like I tried to give my brain enough enough information where it's like, hey, if I mess up, it's not going to be the end of the world. I can just jump to this thing in a second. And I actually found that to be pretty helpful.
Yeah, no, I have to. My biggest thing is I speed up when I talk. I'm a very fast talker, and
It's just because you have so many good ideas.
Well, I just want to get it all out, and like, I just like start wording. I'm like, I want to be done with this.
Yeah.
And I had, when I was in 7th grade, I did it's called forensics, but it has nothing to do with like CSI. Right? It's like the not debate, but like speech.
Oh,
so like,
okay.
They had the prepared speeches. They you could do a extemporaneous speech, or a poem, or the different categories you competed in. Like you practiced for like several months, and then you went for an all-city competition. And I went to Virginia Beach Public Schools, and so they had an all-city competition. And so I did it one time because I was like, I was trying out different things. I was doing debate, like all the kind of like typical pipeline to politics like clubs. And my middle school teacher, every time I would speak, she's like, listen, that was great, love it, you have to slow down. Like, you got it. This speech should take you 3 minutes, not a minute. And so, because I was like just going so fast. And so that's the one thing that like I still have to work on. Because it's like, especially if I mess up something, I'm like, okay, I'm like, I hear her in the back of my head, like, slow down. Or I see her like in front of me, like, slow down, like mouthing it to me. So.
Yeah, I can tell that you're kind of leading a life that's probably going to be in the public eye and like giving speeches. So I think it's like it's pretty cool that you've, even though like there was that like initial fear that you still like jumped in head first, and like you've still like worked through it. Like it's pretty, I don't know. I like to see that when people are like, man, I am not necessarily like this isn't the most like natural thing in the world for me. I'm going to work at that. Like I have so much respect for that.
Yeah.
Because as a kid, I was obsessed with being smart. And so I couldn't let myself feel vulnerable enough to like, to be bad.
Yeah.
Which meant that like, there are certain things that I got really, really good at, but there were just as many that like, just because I was afraid to mess up, I didn't even attempt. And so like my skill level stayed down, like that.
I mean, it's me with Spanish. Like I tried a couple years in high school, a couple years in college, still can't. But yeah, no, I think what helped me too was realizing like, it wasn't an uncommon thing. Like
Oh yeah.
I think the first couple years, like middle school, like early high school, was like, I feel like everyone's just really good at it. I don't know why, like, or like, why, like, I don't know why I'm so terrified to speak in public in front of hundreds of people. Like, but then, like, I remember reading somewhere, like, learning somewhere that the vast majority of people, like, it is one of the most common phobias and fears. And I looked back, I was like, oh, yeah, I had a teachers. I like now as an adult could like realize like, oh, they didn't like speaking in front of like a class of, fifth graders, like, or, fourth graders. But they overcame it because they like at the end of the day, that's what they like to do. That's what they cared about doing. And public speaking, even if they didn't like that part of it, it was kind of like a tool to do what they love. And like one of the things they had to do. And so they could, that's how they could kind of get over it and push forward. But yeah.
I really like how you said that, like tool, like it's a tool to be able to do what you love anyway. So like, yeah, of course, like even your dream job is going to have some downsides to it that you don't want to have, that you don't want to have to do. But like, hey, it's just a little tax. I like I haven't really thought of that like frame before, but I think that I could see that being pretty helpful.
Yeah, of course.
Have you always been this enlightened, or
no? I wouldn't even say I am. Like I still day to day like
that is something an enlightened person would say.
I don't know. I wouldn't give myself that much credit. Still in my early 20s, so still got a lot to learn. But yeah.
Did you know that you want to be in politics very early on?
Not really. I think around fourth grade, I really liked social studies. That was my favorite subject in school, and I remember like very like vividly. I can remember my fourth grade teacher reading us a book about like Jamestown and like the settlers coming over and the Virginia Company and all that. And that I started liking history more and more. Like it became my favorite subject in school. I will say in fifth grade, it was 2012, so it was the Obama's reelection campaign year, and I found myself forming an Obama club, and then they had the Romney club, and so there was definitely the political element, but I never like. I didn't see that. I was like, oh, that's something I could do. It was like, or wanted to do. It was just, I really liked history, and also it was an election year. But like as I went on like through middle school and like I still found myself consistently like history, and in eighth grade we had civics, like those were my favorite classes.
Yeah.
And then it was.
What's your favorite period of history?
Ooh.
As a fellow history nerd who moved to Virginia specifically because it was so close to Williamsburg and the colonial.
I wouldn't say it's my favorite period of history, but I think it's the most like important and interesting to learn about. But like post Civil War, right into like the 1920s before the Great Depression.
Yeah,
I think that like if
very
you're
thinking of this time.
Maybe. But yeah, I really like learning about that because it was like, hey, like, let's try to learn from these mistakes and not like there's other periods of history that do that, but like I think that time frame in particular is really like important.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You studied this subject a lot, like read about it a lot. Whenever you read it, whenever you saw that white people had black slaves, did you feel bad as a white person?
I never had like a conscious moment where I was like, I personally felt
right.
Like realistic. I know, like, my mom and dad didn't like. It was like there was like a realization that if this was a couple hundred years ago, like, and the thought of like that would be what the situation was terrifying to think about. Like if I was born 200 years earlier, that like I would be the people that we're learning about and how they committed all these injustices and acts of racism, and it was terrifying to think about. But I never like. I think that also just kind of strengthened like. I think one of the like not necessarily a political issue, but something I've always really cared about, like in throughout high school and college and campaigns that I've worked on, and anything in politics is always like diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I feel like like that is something that is really present and like needed in this society. But I think that like learning about that and like really being like, wow, this was not that long ago. This is not something that just like like ancient Egypt, like, even then, like, but it's still,
it wasn't about guilt. It was about learning the subject, seeing the horrors of it, and saying,
shock.
We can't do this again. Like, we cannot allow this to happen.
Yeah, it was shock. And then I think putting the pieces together of, okay, well, yeah, we had the Civil War and Abraham Lincoln, quote unquote, freed the slaves and all this stuff. But then we have, Reconstruction, and seeing how, like, the politics of it, because, like, the reason Reconstruction ended was because it was a political decision.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And seeing how a bunch of, white people in DC in these back rooms made a decision that had lasting impacts on generations to come.
What was the, what ended the Reconstruction now? Like, I can't, like,
there was an election. I don't quote me on the year.
Yeah.
But there was an election.
Imagine 1868 or
where the electoral college, like, there was some weird, like, this, where the outcome wasn't finalized based on, like, the popular electoral college vote. It was like a weird. I think it might have even gone to, like, it was possibly going to go to the House and Senate, like, I think maybe it was a Supreme Court decision. Something was going on where basically they were like, hey, this guy won the popular vote, but this guy won, like, the electoral college, like, and so not the electoral, there was something weird going on.
Yeah.
And a bunch of them got together and said, hey, like, the person ended up becoming president. We will make you president. But you have to end Reconstruction. Even though you essentially kind of, like, lost the election.
Yeah.
Like, you have to end Reconstruction. You have to do what we want, and you have to, like, pull the troops out of the South.
That was the big thing. Yeah. So there were, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were ratified after the Civil War as part of getting back into the Union. Your state is going to ratify this amendment, and there were federal troops in southern states making sure that those amendments were basically carried out, essentially, and that people had the rights. That was Reconstruction in a nutshell.
Yeah, and one of the major things being that they had free and fair elections in the South too. Like, we had. I didn't learn about this until I was in college, but there was, after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, it was not uncommon to have a black governor, to have black people winning congressional seats and Senate seats, and, all these positions that, there's this big boom of people who are people of color running and winning these positions, and across all the southern states.
Yeah.
And then as soon as Reconstruction ended, you started seeing a lot of Jim Crow creep in, and a lot of these laws that undermined the amendments that were passed and ratified. But then pretty much overnight, you saw all of the gains that we had made in those elections gone. Like, there was no more black governors. There was no more, like,
So what they would do? There would be several things. I think of the the poll test, and I've seen. Have you ever seen an example of a poll test that was used?
Vaguely. Yeah. Like,
it would be something so. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, okay, good.
It would be something so arbitrary that it would be a bar of soap, and it would be how many suds are on the bar of soap. And you and I could go up there and they'd be like, sir, how many suds are on that bar of soap? And we'd be like, I could say 9, you could say 11. They'd be like, yep, that's correct. And then somebody else, they could be like, no, the correct answer is 41. It was so arbitrary to where they would be able to discriminate against who they wanted to and still let. So only the people they wanted to.
Well, they had those, and there was some that, like, that I would argue is a little more sinister in nature. They would have, because of slavery and, people not wanting black people to learn how to read and write, one of the tests they would use is, like, reading comprehension. They would pull this really complex passage from a book that was probably a college reading level, and, and say, hey, like, can you, like, go through and, like, say, like, basically write a summary of what this is, or tell me what this means, or what does this word mean? That, or, like, they would pull amendments from the Constitution or passages and say, hey, I want you to explain this to me. Like, explain what this random amendment about, not having to house troops in time of war, or what, like, all these things. And, like, like you said, we could go in and, make some BS up and, I don't know, like, and yeah, sure, go vote. But then, like you said, black people, they were like, oh, you didn't get that one quite right. Like, you did explain to me like you're a lawyer. And so unfortunately you can't vote today. I think the poll taxes too, like, were another big, like, and again, it was not that long ago. We had, like, Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan had a relative who still has their poll tax. And, like, it's not that, like, this has happened to families that are around today, like, that or know about it. So
you bring up a very good point, especially in the wake of the Supreme Court or Johnny Reb and the Funky Bunch, their decision in the Calais case with voting rights.
Yeah.
There seems to be now this notion that we're like, we're over that whole, like, discrimination thing. Like, racism is a thing of the past. That has an appeal to a certain segment of the country, particularly like rural areas. Like, people will say, like, there isn't racism. I think it's to a certain extent because people define racism as having a really starched bed sheet that you're wearing.
Yeah. Yes.
What do you think it's going to take to, like, get them to be able to, see the light, so to speak?
I don't quite know. I think also too, like, the gutting of the Voting Rights Act and all these civil rights protections isn't 100% new. Like, we had when Obama was president, there was a Supreme Court case that got rid of Justice Department having to review like maps in states that have been proven and shown time and time again to gerrymander based on race. It was called preclearance, I believe. And in the oral arguments, you had one of the justices who was more conservative leaning saying, well, Obama is president. Like, we can't have racism if we have a black president. Like,
I'm not racist. Sense. I had a black president once.
And so clearly, like, it's already worked, so we don't have to do it anymore. And I think, one of my favorite Ruth Bader Ginsburg quotes is the argument that you're making is basically akin to us going out in a rainstorm with an umbrella.
I have my umbrella.
And because we're not getting wet, throwing the umbrella away.
Yeah.
You're going to get wet as soon as you throw that umbrella away. And we've already seen that happen with this recent Supreme Court case. The days after the Supreme Court case happened and we completely gutted the Voting Rights Act, you had all of these states, many of them who were previously on the pre-clearance list with the Justice Department, gerrymandering in a way that, discriminates against people of color. And so, I don't know what it's going to take to make people realize that just because, we still see instances of, like, very clear rate, like, people in hoods and, people calling each other slurs and, openly discriminating. There's still going to be there. I would argue there's probably always going to be that. But just because we see maybe less of that than we did 100 years ago, maybe, does not mean the systemic racism is gone. Like, that is the point. Things that you don't, like, as white people, we don't see every day because we don't have to experience it.
To me, that is the most insidious part of the idea that, like, they're colorblind and, like, there is no racism anymore. Whenever you say that the status quo is, like, how it's supposed to be, majority white, that's the way it was always intended. Like, that's fine. But if it's majority brown or black, that's racial. So I don't understand what the dichotomy is there, because if you look in Congress, folks that look like you and me, except way older, are heavily represented.
Overrepresented.
Yes.
Vastly overrepresented. Yes.
But the Supreme Court is like, that's just the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I find that to be absolutely just
well, and the sad part about that is, like, we have made gains. Like, we've seen, like, just in terms of, like, our Congress and our state legislatures being more representative of the, communities they serve, we have made a lot of progress, in terms of, like, women being in Congress and in the Senate, people of color, veterans, LGBTQ people, you name it. And with this Supreme Court case, there's a lot of things out right now saying we could lose generations worth of progress in terms of, like, equitable representation in the next election.
Yeah.
Like it is like, and I think that's like the most just absolutely sinister part about this whole thing is like it's very clear like we are doing basically another like ending of Reconstruction.
Yeah,
like that's what this is like because they all these backroom deals and MAGA Republicans with like sinister motives. And when I say MAGA Republicans, I don't mean voters. I mean the people who are in power.
Yeah.
At the very top. Because they know if they can disenfranchise voters now, they're more likely to win in the future. And so it's really it's sad.
Yeah, like I have a big issue with the two-party system. But there's no way to like break that down because Republicans were going to be uniformly against it because they benefit the most from a two-party system. They, if it weren't for gerrymandering, backroom deals, if it weren't for like the political procedure, they would be non-existent at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, they lost the battle of ideas, right around Obama, really, in 2012. Like it was pretty clear that like who they had wasn't going to cut it. And their party was weak enough to where Donald Trump could jump in.
Yeah.
And now the Republican Party, like in 2020, they did not adopt a policy platform at their convention. Their policy platform was literally, we agree with what Donald Trump does.
Yep. It is like, you kind of have to stand in awe of like, like like, yeah, but
he's such a mediocre dude too. Like how? Oh, sorry.
I remember like here, like, I had, a family friend when Trump was running for the first time talk about like, oh, he's this amazing businessman and we're doing great. I'm like, you realize most of his businesses have gone bankrupt. Like, we're not, if you want to like say a businessman, which I don't agree with anyway, the businessman should be in charge of the government because the government is not a business. It serves a completely different purpose.
I hate that argument.
But if you're going to argue that, at least have it be a successful businessman. But I would say too, like, I think the two-party system, like in order to change it, like fundamentally we have to amend the Constitution.
Yeah.
Because the reason really that we have a two-party system in the first place is because of the way our elections have been designed. So single-member districts, for example. Other countries, like let's take our, Congress, for example, House of Representatives. Other countries have multi-member districts. So they have like, there'll be, instead of like here in CD2, well, I guess we're in Norfolk, but in CD2, for example, you'd have like 2 or 3 people representing one district. And so it's not uncommon for have like 2 Republicans and a Democrat, Republican, Democrat, and Green Party or Libertarian Party. And so, but because we prescribe that there's only one person per district, or we don't have a parliamentary system where it's like there's a list, based on like the national vote or whatever it is, because we have single member districts, it really minimizes the opportunity for third parties to even try to do anything in the first place, because you don't, like, let's say you're left-wing Democrat and you are way more progressive than you don't, if there's a quote unquote third party candidate who's more in line with your issues, you don't get anything by voting for them, because you're more likely than not, like over 90% of the time, your vote for the person who aligns closer to your values on like your side of the aisle is more so a vote for the person on the complete opposite side. So voting for Jill Stein, or voting for, a libertarian just elects the person who you least want in the first place. And so, we would have to fundamentally change our Constitution and the way we do elections to even have a shot at having more than 2 parties. I agree. I think the 2-party system doesn't work for most people anymore. And,
what's really interesting about it, like Trump has created a whole lot of opportunities and a whole lot of problems for Democrats. He has alienated moderate folks to the point to where like you don't have Mitt Romney, I can't even remember the guy's
one of the Midwestern states,
yeah,
former vice presidential candidate,
and like the Tim Pawlenty's, I at least know that name, right? Like you don't have those anymore. They've been ostracized, and even down in Georgia, I think Jeff Duncan, who was the Republican lieutenant governor and is about as conservative as you would be like in normal times. He was running for governor as a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
You have him that's on the same ballot, or not on the same ballot, but like with the same party name as Zohran Mamdani and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so it is such a big tent that, like there are like a bigger pool of voters,
mm-hmm.
but it's very tough to be able to have a candidate that can appeal to both of those crowds.
Because you can. Like, I honestly, thinking about the 2024 election, I think what I'm hoping one of the biggest lessons that Democrats have learned is trying to bend over backwards to appeal to this independent voter, this mythical independent voter.
Yeah.
And
is that Midwestern mom? Like, what's she gonna think of this?
Well, because just side note for a second. Sorry. Like, independent voters, like, I would argue they don't really exist. Even if you call yourself an independent, like, there's this, I feel like this American notion of like, well, I'm an independent. I don't let anyone make my decisions for me.
Okay, and then you're a Republican.
Well, or a Democrat. They will poll people who are independents and say, like, months before an election, and say, hey, which way are you leaning? And they'll, okay, and then they'll poll them after they voted. 95% of them, don't quote me on the percentage, but the vast majority of them stick with their original intention. There's not a lot of room for this winning over independent voters, as much as we want to believe that's a thing. And so when you have candidates who follow this very textbook consultant plan to like win the primary, be maybe a little bit more progressive than you usually are, and then just make a hardcore pivot to the center, you're assuming that everyone to the left of you is going to vote for you just because you are better than Donald Trump or whoever the Republican is. That's not the case. We didn't see that this last time. And so but meanwhile, you had Donald Trump who did the complete opposite. He went so far right, talking about eating cats and dogs on the debate stage and doing all of this really like conservative and, just
batshit
far right Republican crazy shit. Like, he won. Like, it's because so I'm hoping that like in not just presidential elections, but just, elections in general, like Democrats, I really feel like we need to start like just run on the platform you believe in. Like, don't like voters will follow you if you're talking about what they care about. And instead of like just pivoting to this independent voter that is never going to vote for you anyway, and then alienating everyone who would have voted for you. We get a lot more bang for our buck, so to speak, by just being true to who we are and staying true to our values versus, trying to appeal to everyone at the same time.
I 100% concur. Like, and as you were saying that, a specific point in the campaign came to mind. It was, I think it was during the summer, and I think it was Tim Walz probably started. I was like, oh, this seems like a very Governor Walz thing to do, but he called J.D. Vance and Trump weird, and that was incredibly effective.
Yeah.
I mean, it melted them down on the right.
Yeah.
And the left got behind it because, like, the dude is a fucking weirdo. Like,
because it was very like plain spoken too. It was like we didn't have to do like, I think a lot of politicians like try to seem more knowledgeable than they are, and so like instead of doing this,
podcast hosts don't do that.
Well, but like they like, when they try to attack an opponent, like, like this guy's like, attacking Donald Trump, like they're very articulate and pulling from history and all that's important. Tim Walz, like to your point, Tim Walz got up there and said what most of the country was thinking. These guys are fucking weird. Like, and so I wish more politicians did that.
But, like they did it for maybe a week or two and then it just dropped off. And that I think that was a really missed opportunity, and it kind of like stalled momentum out. And you know why they stopped? Because it didn't like poll well with the senators. They're like, it's a little too.
There was a consultant in the room who said, "Don't do that."
Yeah, and consultants. It's really easy to demonize the group, but they seem like they know a whole lot of things that aren't true.
Yeah, and they try. I know a lot of like consultants who work on campaign, and like they're really good people. They're trying their best.
Yeah.
but their job is to like analyze the data, like be the like political person in the room. And so, I feel like sometimes campaigns just need to take a step back from that and be like, okay, like that's great.
Yeah.
But like, yeah.
Now, like you kind of the way you said it, I gotten like an actuary came to my mind. Like I'm looking at the data here, and if I insure Connor, well, he goes skydiving. If he skydives, there's a 75% chance that we're going to pay out. I'm going to like cancel. So I've never really thought of the consultant as an actuary, but all they're doing is just trying to predict outcomes based on like present data that's pretty obscure, probably at best,
Well, in polls, like, I feel like a lot of times too, like, not just consultants or like, politicos, but just like the news or people read, like, they see this poll come out and they're like, oh my God, this is like this crystal ball thing that like is going to come true. And like, I don't think enough people realize polls are just a snapshot. Like it's the opinions of the people who were polled during that day.
Yeah.
Like, 10 things could have happened by now to change that. And so, they're a tool, but they're not like this, end all be all.
Yeah. The snapshot in time. I really dove into polls after the election because I was bamboozled by them. I was like, they're wrong. There's no way this is right. But oh well. With polls, you're seeing the snapshot of time. What becomes important is if you can see 4 polls within like a few, like the same poll within a few, same methodology within like a couple of weeks. And then you can start seeing trends maybe like, oh, Connor was at 35, then he's at 42. And then like, oh, okay, this is a clear progression. But if you were to just see that one last poll, it really wouldn't be able to tell you like that much of that much information.
You want to know a great example of that? 2021 here in Virginia during the governor's election. If you look at like the polling averages, Terry McAuliffe started off with this massive like lead, like 10 points or whatever. Like if you just looked at that one poll, yeah, Terry's gonna win. Like, or former Governor McAuliffe is gonna win. But then you start like since like from like August on. I remember because I was working on a campaign, I was like scared because I was like checking it every other day, like, oh God. But you saw this like trend, to your point, of it going towards Glenn Youngkin. And then by the time you got to election day, the average, from the polls had him up by 0.3%, or Glenn Youngkin up by 0.3%. And so you see that from, up however many points former Governor McAuliffe was. Like, so yeah, trend, to your point, like trends are I think the most important part of like polls and all that.
One of my favorite pictures in history is Harry Truman holding up the piece of paper the day after the election that says Dewey defeats Truman,
Yep. I remember that.
Okay. So I have I think it's somewhere around there. I have a Thomas Dewey campaign poster. I love having that because his win was so inevitable that like, yes, the press had already written the story the day of, but the Secret Service had also nicknamed, or knew that they were going to nickname Air Force One Dewdrop in January. Like they had already picked out the name, like they were changing curtains out. And one of the big reasons why they did was, oh man, I can't remember his name now, but he was an advisor for Franklin Roosevelt. And he had something, it was whatever his last name was, law. And that was people decided who they were going to vote for by the time of the conventions. And so polling after the convention was unnecessary. And that was the general wisdom at the time. And so people just basically stopped polling after election or after the conventions. But there were like the few polls that did come out actually, to your point, were showing like the Truman's like, hey, he's starting to progress a little bit, but they were completely discounted because
the little it's been. Yeah. I mean, similar thing kind of happened in 2016 with, there's a lot of things that went on, but like when you try to look at the polling, a lot of people like, or like that's when they started saying like, oh, polling is, BS, never look at the polling, like, all that. Well, one of the things a lot of pollsters, a lot of very prominent pollsters were doing, they were only looking at likely voters. So when they were doing their they weren't taking like all these, you know, people who are registered to vote, who maybe not as likely, but like what they didn't, you know, foresee is Trump kind of inspiring a lot of these, like, you know, the swing states that Hillary Clinton lost and all this, you know, all the other ones. You get all these registered voters who, because they weren't in the polling average, like they didn't get accounted for, but then they kind of just quietly swooped in and voted for Trump. So yeah, like there's a lot of there's always lessons that get learned from those kind of big errors. Like after 2016, like a lot of pollsters like realized they kind of messed up, and adjusted. And so now it's like, you know, there's polling is never 100% accurate. That's why there's, you know, a margin of error. But you know, they've accounted for a lot of the mistakes, and I'm sure they've definitely accounted for that big error for Truman. But yeah,
there was this notion of the kind of the quiet Trump voter who would not. They would never admit that they were going to vote for him to a pollster, like to a live pollster. But they would act like online surveys would show Trump doing better. What I think is interesting, though, is now the way Trump has behaved in these like past 10 years, there is no like reluctant or quiet Trump voter anymore. You know, like you're either MAGA or you do not like him at all.
Yeah, or you just I mean, I still think there are some. Like, I don't think they've like fully like stopped existing.
That's true. I've written that man's political obituary so many times.
I feel like in 2020, maybe that was like, or not 2024, like during the election, maybe there was a lot of people who ended up voting for Trump, who didn't really want to say, but they were thinking like, hey, like I don't, you know, yes, we had COVID, but before COVID, you know, the economy was relatively okay. Like there were still issues, but it was okay. And so he can't be that bad, right? Like, you know, but maybe they didn't want to admit that to their, you know, their wives or, you know, their friends. But yeah, no, I think, you know, by now, I think a lot of people have kind of, even who voted for Trump in 2024. I mean, we see this a lot with a lot of Latino voters who, you know, we saw that massive swing in some states to Trump. They've realized, like, polling now, you know, for what it's worth, shown them, you know, go right back home to, you know, where they were voting for Democrats. Same thing with young people. A lot of majority of young people still voted for Democrats, but there was a swing towards Donald Trump. And, you know, for probably a lot of the same reasons, like, you know, the economy and things like that. But now you're seeing, again, the same kind of like, oh crap, we messed up, and back to the majority of them voting for Democrats. And so, to your point, like those quiet Trump voters, like I think are quietly realizing that that may have been a mistake. So
what is so interesting to me, and you kind of alluded to it, was that like it seemed like voters had a very short-term memory. Like I remember 2017 through 2021, and there was chaos. Well, it's pretty much like it is now. Not quite as bad. There were still a few institutional guardrails in place that could like hold them, but there was so much chaos that every week it was like a different story, different ridiculous thing. I think in my head, I just assumed like everyone was going to remember how awful that was, and we're never going to give him a chance again, especially after January 6th. Like, how is that not a line in the sand for everyone?
You know, every waking moment, I wonder how that was not like the line in the sand. Like, and again, like going like what I said earlier, you kind of have to stand in awe of like the rationalizing and all. But honestly, like, you know, I don't even blame people for that. Like, you know, I have to constantly remind myself that I'm in a bubble. I am the quote political nerd who like, you know, is watching polling videos before I go to bed, and like, you know, watching, you know, the news and all these things, whatever. And like, am very like tuned in to politics. And so like, I have to remember sometimes that like for the vast majority of people, they're only intermittently paying attention.
Yeah.
You know, they are raising kids, they're working full-time jobs, they have, you know, aging parents they're caring for, they're trying to go to school, like, especially young people, oh my gosh, like, trying to get, like, college-age kids to, or not kids, I just graduated last year, but, like, college-age voters to just go vote or pay attention is, like, pulling teeth. but then again, like, it's not like, I don't view that as like a fault thing. Like, you have all these, the vast majority of Americans who are paying attention, paying attention intermittently. And I think the other part of it too is like Trump is probably one of the biggest opportunists that I've ever seen in politics. Like, he came in during 2015, 2016, where, he had a great economy that he was, it wasn't working for everyone. Like, there was always going to be problems with that. But in the grand scheme of things, better than we're doing now. By a long shot. And so he inherited that while also, kind of capitalizing on all this anti-establishment sentiment. And, it's also very difficult for, if you have a president who wins, the same party wins two elections in a row, for then the third election to also go to the same party. So he had all of these things that were kind of, whether we realize it or not, that were working in his favor, and he capitalized on that. Then you fast forward, he lost in 2020. Then for 4 years straight, just ranted and raved about he was still holding rallies as if he was running for president. He has been campaigning for president since 2015. He has never stopped. And so, like, he came in and we had, even though, compared to the rest of the world, we were handling inflation better than most other countries. Again, a lot of issues. Don't get me wrong. There's, a lot of things that I wish we did differently in those 4 years that Biden was president, or at least prioritized maybe a little differently. But in the grand scheme of things, we were doing better, even though we didn't feel that 100% because of post-COVID inflation, because all of these things that kind of disrupt that, I don't feel we give enough credit towards, Biden and Kamala Harris. But he came in and capitalized again. He did the same thing he did in 2016, where he was like, well, things were better when I was president, right? Like, you weren't paying $10 for eggs, or, you didn't have rent that has gone up by $500 in 2 years. Like, you didn't have all these things when I was president. And so he capitalized on it again. And you had, again, like, a very unpopular president with Joe Biden, like, with him, being older and all that. And so he just used his 4 years just to rant and rave about every little thing. And then he's just an opportunist. So when you have those situations combined with the fact that a lot of people are only intermittently paying attention, they're not maybe even thinking or prioritizing in their head, hey, we have someone who led an insurrection on our capital.
Yeah.
Which I can't believe I'm saying those words so plainly, because that's still a wild thing to have happened. But
it should be.
They're not calculating it. They're making their decision in between picking up their kids from school and grabbing their groceries, and all they're seeing is the price of the eggs they're getting from the supermarket, and the fact that they might have to move because their rent is going up, and their kid can't save enough money for college anymore, and they may not be able to go to college, and they can't help. They're not that's how they're making their decision. And I think there was I can't remember who said it. I think it was an advisor to Bill Clinton when he was running for president, but he was like, "Is the economy stupid?"
Oh, James Carville.
Yes. Yeah. There we go. I could see his
the raging
face.
Cajun. Yeah,
he was. It's the economy stupid, and I think that's just when you have an opportunist like that, and people who are intermittently paying attention due to no fault of their own, we get the Donald Trumps.
Yeah.
People are quickly realizing that was a mistake now that we have gas over $4 a gallon, and we'll probably never see it below $3 for at least until 2032. But elections have consequences, and so I think people, the way we win more and prevent the Donald Trumps of the world from being in power again is by doing our best to say, hey, it may feel good right now. You may think that it's a good idea to vote for someone who has openly said he's going to put tariffs. The amount of people who Googled what a tariff was after the election drove me wild.
Yeah.
And I was so mad, but I was also like, but again, I can't, we as people who are trying to get Democrats elected and care about progressive issues, we don't win anything by being mad at voters. At the end of the day, we just didn't earn their vote.
Yeah.
However you want to articulate that or say why we did or did not win, it's fine. We didn't win their vote. They still made that decision. And so anyway, I just went on a whole rant.
No, you touched on a lot. What gets me and it's kind of touching on what you said, was Donald Trump gets to get by with this double standard. Joe Biden was old. Donald Trump is older. Joe Biden had a really bad debate performance. I totally get that.
Yeah.
Donald Trump falls asleep and shits himself in cabinet meetings. And yet people are talking about him being the like definition of virility. I don't understand. Am I just not? Is my reality not reality, or like what's going on?
He, I think he, as much of an opportunist as he is, I think he's also a very talented bullshitter. Like when you talk about like the types of people, like power people have, he can set the agenda. He sets the conversation very well. Like that is something that he like, hate him or love him.
Yeah,
he's really good at setting the agenda. And if he goes out on a debate stage and says, these immigrants are eating cats and dogs. Did you guys see that? They're eating cats and dogs. You had like a lot of the country believe in that. Like there is not like he has done something like he doesn't feel like a politician, and so there's not that instant skepticism. I feel like more so, I guess, when he was first running.
Yeah.
But like because he's the quote unquote not a politician, even though he's been running for president for 10 years, or over 10 years at this point, like him going out and saying these seemingly anti-establishment things, and yes, he's older than Joe Biden, but he didn't feel older than Joe Biden. He, he has a really good PR team during the election of like people they were able to really like make him seem like he wasn't as old as he was.
Have you seen Stephen Chung? He's the communications guy. He looks like the Mucinex man. It looks like a giant snotball.
I think once in the first Trump term when you had Stephen Miller up there, yeah. But yeah, that's a whole nother. I won't go down that rabbit hole. But I think the other like thing too is like and not to go back to the opportunist thing too much. He also, with the exception of Joe Biden, so out of the 3 times he's ran for president, the first and last time were against a woman. And when we talk about double standard, like you had mentioned, like talk about a double standard. Like you had 2 of the most qualified women. 2 most qualified people to ever run for president, and there was just this like, something's just not right. I don't trust them. I don't know why I don't trust them.
They'll be too emotional to be president.
Even though all wars have been started by men in this country, like
yes.
and you like
Donald Trump gets mad and wants to nuke somebody. Yet, like he is the like emotionally rational one.
Yeah,
it's absurd.
It is, and like I think, and just a quick like note about like women candidates like officially running for president. Like we always talk about the glass ceiling, and they're gonna break that glass ceiling. They're gonna shatter it. We don't talk enough about the glass cliff, where like especially I think one of the greatest disappointments of 2024 was Joe Biden shouldn't have ran. Like love him a lot of accomplishments were really good that he did, and he has a great career in public service. I really wish that he got out sooner. Because if that was a decision that was going to be made, it should not have happened 100 days before. And so, which has never happened before in history. Like that was a very highly unusual election, the way it went about. And so you put up, Kamala Harris, and, there's always an initial excitement, but you're giving her a situation where 99% of candidates would not win.
Yeah.
Like you could have put, George Washington on the ballot as a Democrat in 2024, and I don't think he would have won. Like that's how like bad the situation was. And so you're giving her like, this opportunity to quote unquote break the glass ceiling, but what you're really doing is shoving her over a glass cliff and making her, hey, Black woman, like I want you to solve our problem that I as a white man created, which we see a lot in history and in the present. And so Trump took advantage of that. Like, there's all this instant, as soon as she was the top of the ticket, there was this instant skepticism by people who still like, I think we all have internalized sexism, regardless of how woke we are. Like that's just part of society, especially like internalized racism. And so, you're trying to defeat a fascist on the ballot, like, and then you like have the situation. So yeah, I think like we don't talk enough about like the, crisis she was presented with. And, there was, I'm sure you've heard, like there was polling that I think finally made Biden realize that he should get out of the race, where Trump was going to win over 300 something, like over 400 electoral college votes.
Yeah.
And so, like, Kamala Harris lost, but she, like, held the ground. It was way closer than it would have been if Biden was still on the ballot. But yeah, I don't know. I can't remember exactly how we were brought up, but it was just
speaking of being opportunist. I want to ask you, where do you want to go, or where do you think Democrats go from here? Like, what is 2028? What's the ideal ticket, do you think?
I don't know who the ideal ticket is. I think the components of it, though, like, we need candidates who can, I don't want candidates who are going to just pivot to the center. Like, I honestly, I don't like Gavin Newsom. Like, not my favorite candidate. Whether or not he's going to run or not, he's already kind of running. But like candidates of that mindset who are, demonizing transgender people, and like, not demonizing, but like throwing them under the bus, essentially.
Very much
to try to save the Democratic Party, quote unquote. I think any candidate like that needs to not run. Hopefully voters will reject that. But I think, like, kind of like what we were talking about earlier of, we can't just pivot to the center. We have to give people a reason to vote for us. And like, all of the people who, like, they're very progressive, they're very liberal leaning, but they're not motivated to vote. Candidates who can find those voters and really engage them and get them to the ballot box. I think we need candidates like that. I'm a little biased as a young person. I want someone who's going to maybe appeal to young voters, or at the very least is younger. So hopefully, I don't think Joe Biden's going to run again, or Bernie Sanders, or like some of the older candidates, but I think we need a younger, more progressive candidate who speaks to this kind of big tent that is the Democratic Party, and not just the center, and arguably focusing on independent voters. That's not how I think we win. But yeah, I don't like. There are a lot of good potential candidates who've been floated around, and I'm more focused on getting through the midterms, and then next year in Virginia are state legislative races. But
that was a very good political answer there. I'm too focused on 26 stuff.
Listen, but we have 3 races in Virginia that are like very flippable, and I think we always get excited about the big, like, glowing, like, oh, who's going to run for president, or all the, like, hey, you have a congressional candidate in your district that could win, like, if you try. So.
Well, Connor, man, this has been a lot of fun, dude. Thank you for acting out with me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.